Hello and welcome to the virtual workshop on traceability opportunities within the food and drug supply chains. Before we get started, there are some housekeeping notes I will be reviewing. First, AIM North America stands as the forefront trade organization uniting manufacturers, distributors, educators, and users of AIDC technologies. Our commitment lies in delivering unbiased, accurate information on AIDC technologies and its applications without commercial influence. Joining AIM offers exclusive benefits. One major one being able to take part in our industry-leading meetings. Upcoming meetings include our food supply chain, visibility technologies, and RFID experts groups. Email info@aimglobal.org or scan the QR code for a guest invite to these sessions. Now I'll quickly review the AIM North America antitrust policy. It's the policy of AIM North America to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM North America activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of these antitrust laws. AIM North America webinars are held for the primary purpose of advancements in our industry, which necessarily involves development of work product intended solely for the public domain. AIM North America has developed this policy for the protection of its members who engage in this important collaborative effort. Here's the agenda for today's workshop. I do want to note that if you have questions for any of these sessions, please save those for the 2:30 portion of the workshop. Lucy and the team will look to answer questions you have on any portion of the sessions at that time. At any point, you can submit those questions to us by using the Q&A option at the bottom of the application screen. Here are the speakers for today's workshop. Before each session, each of these speakers will go into more detail about their industry background. So let's get started with our first session. We are pleased to have Jeannie Duckett from Avery Dennison Identification Solutions giving an introduction to FSMA 204 and the DSCSA. Jeannie is the Senior Manager of Food Traceability and Transparency. Jeannie, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. So greetings, and I want to welcome everyone here today to this AIM webinar. I hope you enjoy it. We've been busy over the last 2.5 months getting ready for it. Well, as Mike said, I'm Jeannie Duckett, and I'm very thrilled to share a bit about myself with you all. I have an extensive background in wireless communications, RFID, 2D barcodes, and data collection. I've spent a number of years cultivating a passion for traceability, especially in the food and medical supply chains. My journey has been shaped by a commitment to standards-based interoperability, because I truly believe it's the best solution for all members of the supply chain, and I have a relentless pursuit of excellence in everything I do. I have the privilege of being on the AIM North American board. I'm the global convener for AIDC and applications for the ISIL, and I also serve the GS1 global community by being a co-chair in circularity and the tag data standard. I'd like to thank AIM North America and Julie McGill for inviting me here to speak today. Today, we're going to discuss two watershed legislations in the United States, the Drug Supply Chain Security Act and FSMA 204. We're going to talk a little bit about why government are creating these regulations, how they are alike, how they're different, and most importantly, what impact are they going to have on building out the digital supply chain of the future? So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the Drug Supply Chain Security Act. The DSCSA is the United States federal law enacted to enhance the security of the pharmaceutical supply chain. It was passed in 2013, and the primary goal of the DSCSA is to safeguard consumers from exposure to counterfeit or gray market, contaminated, or otherwise potentially harmful drugs. The law outlines a comprehensive framework for tracing and tracking of prescription drugs as they move through the supply chain, from manufacturer to distributors, and ultimately to the point of dispense, including pharmacy, either standalone or in retail grocery stores, healthcare facilities, or other distribution points where individuals can access their prescribed medicine. The DSCSA mandates the use of product identifiers, including unique serial numbers and barcodes on certain prescription drug packages. This enables stakeholders to trace the distribution history and verify the authenticity of pharmaceutical products. The law also establishes a requirement for the reporting of certain transactions and the detection and response to illegitimate products in the supply chain. Overall, the DSCSA aims to establish a transparent, secure, interoperable pharmaceutical supply chain to protect the integrity of drug distribution system and safety of patients. In September 2023, the FDA announced the availability of final guidance for the industry entitled DSCSA Standards for the Interoperable Exchange of Information for Tracing of Certain Human Finished Prescription Drugs. You have to love the FDA titles. But anyway, this guidance identifies the standards needed to facilitate the adoption of secure, interoperable electronic data exchange among the pharmaceutical distribution supply chain and clarifies trading partners, products, and transactions that are subject to these standards. So before we continue on today, I'm really excited to introduce you to an initiative from AIM called Verified Reg. For over 50 years, AIM Global has been the leading authority in automatic identification technologies and industry standards. In fact, the AIM Barcode Symbologies Group, Technical Symbology Group, known as the TSC, has prepared all barcode standards for ISO publication. With that depth of experience, AIM has developed Verify Reg as a data integrity tool to aid compliance with the US FDA DSCSA. Verify Reg serves to authenticate the structure of codes on pharmaceuticals and ensure the adherence to mandated data markers, which builds confidence in maintaining data integrity throughout the supply chain. AIM's extensive experience in automatic identification provides unbiased information, educational resource, setting standards, position us to have the right people in the right places to create this initiative and support the regulatory compliance within the pharmaceutical supply chain. So the Drug Supply Chain Security Act mandated the use of data matrix symbols. But in addition to using data matrix symbols, the GS1 Code 128 and RAIN RFID are also used in the pharmaceutical supply chain. Verify Reg will verify that the content and data structure of these data carriers are correct for interoperability. So basically, who benefits from this? Basically, everyone in the supply chain, manufacturers, wholesalers, packagers, dispensers, and ultimately regulatories and the consumers. So if you have any more information, please drop a question in the chat or reach out to Mary Lou Bosco after this meeting. So moving on to one of my favorite topics, FSMA 204, Enhanced Traceability for Certain Foods. So in response to the growing food safety challenges occurring within the food system, the Obama administration signed into law the Food Safety Modernization Act in 2011. The Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, is a sweeping set of regulations, changing how we approach food safety in the United States. Specifically, what we're going to talk about today, there's 7 major parts to FSMA regulations passed in 2011. Today, we're going to talk about the final rule and requirements for additional traceability for certain foods, also known as the Final Food Traceability Final Rule, which implements FSMA Section 204. I should have said this up front, but I will say it now. AIM is a non-biased standard organization. We are not the FDA. So if you have any specific questions about to ask the FDA or any of the content that presented today for the DSCSA or for FSMA 204, you can certainly reach out to AIM, AIM Global. We may recommend that you contact the FDA. So for the food industry, understanding and complying with FSMA 204, it's not just a legal requirement. It's a commitment to public health and safety. But it also creates many value-add opportunities to leverage supply chain traceability and visibility. So let's talk about what this means. So first off, if you're wondering if FSMA 204 applies to you, you have to consider the scope of your business. The rule primarily targets businesses that manufacture, process, pack, or hold foods listed on the food traceability list. There are certain exemptions listed on the FDA websites, and there's a nice tool up there that walks you through whether or not you must comply for the rule, which comes into compliance in January 2026, or that the rule doesn't apply to you. So the overarching goal of FSMA 204 and the rest of FSMA is to prevent foodborne illnesses. Section 204 focuses on enhancing traceability of food on the food traceability list, assuring that businesses can quickly identify and address potential safety issues. The rule emphasizes the need for detailed record keeping, and you're required to submit within 24 hours of being requested what's called a sortable electronic spreadsheet to the FDA. So specifically, FSMA 204 requires supply chain actors to maintain records of critical tracking events and the associated key data elements that apply to your business. You are not required to have events for the entire supply chain. So entities that manufacture, process, pack, or hold foods on the FTL, specifically harvesters, packers, processors, distributors, food retailers, they must maintain and share these electronic records. The required critical tracking depend on your role in the supply chain, whether you're a producer, a manufacturer, a processor, distributor, or retailer. But it's really key to note, we just finished talking about the DSCSA, that the commonality of the required critical tracking events with the DSCSA, as well as other initiatives we'll briefly touch on. These critical tracking events include things like commission or the creation of an item in the supply chain, packing, unpacking, shipment, receiving, and transformations. So here it briefly gives you an idea of the scope and depth of the food traceability list, and there at the bottom is the FDA reference to the food traceability list. This list is actually quite comprehensive. So it includes things like nut butters, deli salads, leafy greens, melons, shell eggs, tropical tree fruits, crustaceans, cucumbers, fin fish, whether they're packed or fresh, and other fresh produce, chopped vegetables, and chopped fruit. And so it's really important that if you are in the food distribution or processing supply chain, that you understand what's on the food traceability list and what your potential exposure would be. So I'd like to take a brief moment to compare the DSCSA to FSMA 204. So the DSCSA specifically obviously focuses on the pharmaceutical supply chain, whereas FSMA 204 focuses on food designated to require those additional traceability records or the foods on the food traceability list. Their objectives are actually quite similar. The DSCSA is to prevent unfit counterfeit drugs from entering the supply chain. FSMA 204 is to identify and remove product identified as a potential source of foodborne illness. And then the implementations are also similar. So the DSCSA was a phased implementation focusing on sterilization, traceability, and interoperability. For the FSMA 204 on January 20th, 2026, there is a single compliance date for all covered members of the food supply chain. And they're focusing on that electronic support sortable spreadsheet, which contains your critical tracking events and your key data elements, which Julie will definitely go into more depth on. So we've been talking about the DSCSA and FSMA 204, which are regulatory compliance. In other words, they're the ground floor to participating in those industries. This always reminds me of the shipping label initiatives of the late 80s, early 90s, where people used to do what was called slap and ship compliance. So they would print a shipping label, put it on their box, it was headed out of their industry, but they didn't really change any of their processes or their shipping procedures to comply with the shipping or the advanced shipping notices or the purchase orders. So you really, with DSCSA and FSMA 204, it's kind of the same thought process. If all you do is the minimum to meet a requirement, whether it's regulatory based or brand based, all it's ever going to be is a cost adder to your system. However, since the COVID-19 pandemic, supply chains have come into very great focus. The UN in 2020 released the UN Global Compact which address supply chain sustainability. Because supply chain sustainability is a cutting issue, that compact applied it against all 4 global compact issues, including human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. A company's entire supply chain can make a significant impact in promoting human rights, fair labor, environmental progress, and anti-corruption. The UN Compact participations rank supply chain practices as the biggest challenge in improving their sustainability. But the challenges really extend to what's known as supply chain visibility. So in a recent report that was released, it's talked about the fact that 8% of the stock is perishes or discarded annually. That's all stock across all different industries. This is $163 billion worth of inventory that's discarded annually. And so you got to think about that. So if you discard a product, you have to use the resources to make that product. You have to use the resources to transport that product, to sell that product, or for the retailer to discard it, or for the consumer to discard it. And another thing, consumers consistently rank increased transparency about materials and ingredients as the top way brands can help them make more sustainable purchases about apparel, beauty, and food. So as you approach your digital supply chain or your supply chain visibility, you certainly get traceability, which includes that transparency and visibility of your product, which can address waste and also overproduction. Traceability, for the same reason the Drug Supply Chain Security Act enabled it, traceability, it helps protect the integrity of a supply chain. So if you know where item was manufactured, how it was transported, and where it was distributed and sold, it goes a long way to fighting gray market or counterfeiting. Traceability supports sustainability efforts by providing insights into the environment and impact of your supply chain. Recalls. Once you understand where your product is, you can do what's called a surgical recall. For those of the people in the food supply chain, the recent recalls like the romaine lettuce one in 2018, where the government just basically recalled the entire products from 2 states. So if you have traceability, you have an idea of where a product was commissioned, transported, and sold, then you can do what's known as surgical recall and only recall those products that are impacted. Traceability really increases consumer trust in the supply chain. Back in 2018, it was kind of unnerving to walk into a restaurant and have it posted on the door, "We're not serving romaine lettuce today, don't eat it." And consumer safety. Everybody's concerned about maintaining consumer safety. So I wanted to give you a quick snapshot. Today, we're focusing really heavily on the drug supply chain and FSMA 204. But it's really important to understand that these initiatives are not happening in a vacuum. There on the screen, I'm showing the 6 major regions of the world, and all 6 major regions of the world are enacting legislation in different and sometimes the same supply chains. Africa is working on forced traceability, pharmaceutical, and cocoa, which is a big issue for them. In Australia, they're doing the pharmaceutical, agricultural traceability, and then working on the national framework for recycled content. In Europe, I'm the GS1 Global Co-Chair for the Digital Product Passport that addresses circularity. And the thing about these different initiatives around the world is a lot of time, if I'm in the United States and I want to sell into Europe, I have to comply with the Digital Product Passport regulations. If I'm in Europe and I want to sell in the United States, I have to comply with FSMA 204. So that's why it's sort of important to understand what's happening on a global basis. So the 2020s, I think, really is going to play out to be the decade of digital supply chain. By the end of this decade, those businesses that actually embrace digital supply chains, assigning to their product globally unique identifiers, and then tracking it and capturing those critical tracking events to build out, whether it's for FSMA 204, Digital Product Passport, or enhanced traceability initiatives, are really going to be well positioned to succeed and go into that. There's pilot projects. So looking back through history, the IFT back in 2012, Dr. Jennifer McIntyre released something called Pilot Products for Improving Product Traceability Along Food System Supplies. And in that report, it said the process of conducting a stepwise product tracing investigation was complicated and oftentimes very confusing. Inconsistencies in the terminology, the numbering systems, formatting, legibility, and occasionally the language sometimes required the IFT to contact the firm to gain clarification, increasing the amount of time to capture data before meaningful analysis could be begun. So in summary, back in 2012, when the IFT was looking at potential FSMA legislation, they found that there were several areas such as uniformity, standardization, record keeping, coordination and communication of supply chain members, which could be improved that would increase the ability to recall product out of the field. And that report, which is up on the FDA website, was really foundational in forming both FSMA 204 as well as the DSCSA. Back in 2018, the Healthcare Distributor Alliance called for the FDA endorsement of GS1 consensus-based standards to increase standardization and lower the cost of adoption. So there's standards really do accelerate invention, cultivate trust, and ensure that IT investments are future-proofed when they're based on an interoperable framework. And it's always challenging when you start a program or a project and say, you know, I'm only going to be in this one little area. I'm not going to impact Bob or Gene or Bill. So I don't really need to use standards. I could just, because this is just going to be in my own little sandbox. And it's really amazing. I've seen this time and time again in the industry. You start out a project in your own business, but it becomes successful and it starts to touch other businesses and supply chain. So it's really important to base your supply chain, your digital supply chain on standards. So traceability is a journey, not a destination. And man, I've thrown a lot of information that thankfully John and Julie are going to go through and explain a little bit better and more in depth. But it's really important to realize that this doesn't have to happen on day one. On January 2026, you do need to be compliant with FSMA 204, but really your journey to a digital supply chain really consists of your data readiness. And really in data readiness, you think about what does it mean to be data ready? You want to identify who your data owners are, what the data needs to be collected, and perform that gap analysis. And how you're going to share that data with other members of the supply chain. And that's where standards come into play. Your process challenges, unlocking, traceability is looking at standardization again, digitization, and unique identification. Data becomes less reliable and more expensive to maintain the further it moves away from its source. Standardization practices should begin in the first mile. And then your stakeholders. Your stakeholders are really critical in this initiative and in any really initiative. And that's key to remember that have you communicate with your stakeholders? Do you understand what they're going to provide to you and what you're going to provide to them, and understand that common language or that standardized language that you're going to talk in? And finally, technology readiness. The FDA food traceability rule does not stipulate the use of any particular digital technologies other than the fact that when the FDA contacts you, you must support that, send in that sortable electronic spreadsheet. In the DSCSA, they were a little more prescriptive of how they wanted products identified and to exchange data. But in either case, when you start implementing a traceability system, you need to understand that a lot of times your legacy supply chain systems will need to be evaluated for fit to purpose and how to meet the data process and data requirements. And then finally, traceability data is likely to be spread throughout multiple systems. So that's going to need a data owner or a process owner to update it and keep it consolidated. So it's an exciting process. You'll find lots of information about your business going through this journey, things that you may not have known already. And it's really a benefit to moving you towards that digital supply chain. So I'd like to thank you for listening to me, my introduction on Drug Supply Chain Security Act and FSMA 204. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce John DePaulo. John leads key strategic initiatives at ACES while he designs, develops, and implements solutions to meet customers' needs. John is very widely recognized in the industry as a technical and business process expert. He routinely engages businesses and industry experts to identify trends and opportunity. In addition, John is a member of the AIM Global Board and believes in cooperating with the industry in education, training, and standards development that build that foundation that our industry rests on. So, John?
Jeannie, thank you for that introduction. The setup for the panel that we have is going to be, that was great. So kind of going through, DSCSA first, and I think that as some of the folks who tuned in, would think, well, why are we doing a discussion on DSCSA when this is a FSMA 204 webinar? And what I really think is that the learnings from the DSCSA that the panelists that I am privileged to work with here can bring forward and really talk about, kind of some of the issues that they had solved, some of the issues that they still have to solve, some of the challenges, and also some of the successes. Though all of those things we want to kind of bring forward from our learnings from putting in a similar yet different regulation as it relates to track and trace of items through the supply chain. So I'm honored to be with the panel that I have today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but just to name them out here. So we have Greg Gorniak, Laurel Wade, and Tony Funk. So Greg, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, John. So my name is Greg Gorniak. I'm VP of Manufacturer Operations and Data Services for a wholesale distributor named Cencora. We were formerly called AmerisourceBergen. You may be more familiar with that name. We recently changed our name back in the August, September timeframe last year as we have gone more global. So Cencora is our new name. So I'm running the Secure Supply Chain project over here at Cencora, which is really all the aspects of the Drug Supply Chain Security Act. And how we operate as a wholesale distributor.
Laurel, you want to introduce yourself to our group here this afternoon?
Sure. Thank you, John. As John said, my name is Laurel Wade. I'm with Fresenius Kabi. We're a global healthcare company that specializes in life-saving medicines and technologies in the areas of infusion, transfusion, and clinical nutrition. My role in the company is in our supply chain solutions group, and I'm focusing on DSCSA compliance. I've served previously in other roles within the organization, but always supporting implementation toward the compliance with the regulation itself.
And our third panelist, Tony, you have to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Tony Funk. I'm the president and CEO over at Spotsy. We do just as we say, we help spot and see changing conditions in the supply chain, and whether that be impact, tilt, temperature, humidity, different types of things that can go wrong in the supply chain, if you will. Thanks, John.
Excellent. So, rather than go through, a series of slides today, we do have some slides to support the discussion. We're going to run this as a roundtable, and I really want to start because we've all been at this, for quite some time. So, everyone on the panel was probably involved back when it was California e-pedigree and Florida e-pedigree, and then it became the DSCSA, and it has evolved certainly over time. And there has been a lot of learnings, and there have been a lot of different ways of approaching the DSCSA. And I want to start, Greg, with you. So as a distributor, you deal with a wide variety of challenges. And when you look at onboarding partners, which, the people that are working today in FSMA 204 are going to have to deal with onboarding partners, what were some of the challenges that you saw, over the onboarding process in DSCSA?
Yeah, great question. So the largest, I think, challenge that we ran into, and I'll make this kind of a two-folded answer, is that the background of the DSCSA was that it was a 10-year plan, right, to activate. It was enacted in 2013. We're now in 2024, and we have this extra stabilization year. But there was no, let's say, phased implementation of, you have all these different trading partners that are at different levels. You have manufacturers that start the process. You have wholesalers that are downstream partners to the manufacturers. Then you have dispensers who are at the bottom, or at the last downstream partner. But the problem is that it was, hey, here's a deadline, go do it. And you all have this big bang approach. And then you have manufacturers, which, again, specifically for me, I deal with about 500 unique manufacturers, and they're of all different shapes and sizes. They're gigantic, they're large, they're global, and they're down to little biofarm that makes one product. So the largest challenge that we ran into with onboarding is that everybody was at a different stage in their journey of the DSCSA. So when you reach out, you might be ready, and you go, hey, I'm ready, let's talk and let's get this going. You may only have 10% of your customer base or your supplier base that was ready to do anything. So that was an interesting piece, is that there wasn't one where we could say, and there was also not, even when we go downstream and we were trying to onboard, or we're still onboarding dispensers and those kind of customers, is that not everybody's ready to go. Everybody's at their own unique phase in this process. So that's hard to say, well, I'm sitting here ready to go, and either I'm hurrying up and waiting, or people aren't ready, or somebody else is waiting for me because I'm not ready yet, or the downstream partner, my dispensers are waiting for data that I'm not getting from the manufacturer. So it's everybody's in these different parts of their journey. That was one of the hardest challenges.
Yeah, that's interesting. Laura, I want to go to you, to bring a different perspective from a DSCSA and your experience as a manufacturer. You're kind of at the start of the chain where you are creating product. So when you think about your experiences with the DSCSA, can you talk to the audience about kind of how you got started, how you started to interact with your downstream partners, and what's interesting about Fresenius Kabi is they also introduced two different technologies into this process, right? So they were in the 2D barcode side as well as RFID, which was interesting. So I'm sure that you have some good experiences with not only how do I connect, but how do I leverage new technology on the manufacturing side and get that brought into the process.
Sure, thank you. As you mentioned, we're a manufacturer, and we're also part of a global company. So I think that helped us because these initiatives are not only in the United States, they're being developed for implementation in other countries as well. So we have a global team that had already been looking into some of these requirements for other countries, and that was a good place to start. So certainly as a manufacturer, we're at the beginning of the supply chain. So we knew that some of these things would apply to us before they applied to our trading partners. We dug in, like many, I'm sure, we dug into the regulation itself to understand what was required for us as a manufacturer, what's not required, and when it's required. And that has been an iterative process throughout, really in the planning stages and throughout the 10-year span of the regulation. So we look to see not only what applied to us as a manufacturer, but also what we would need to fulfill the regulation from our suppliers and also to provide to our customers. Again, looking to understand how to make the entire thing interoperable has, I'm sure, always been on everyone's minds. So in the end, in our company, it's really been a collaborative effort with many internal functions, including representatives from my group, from supply chain, but also from our manufacturing sites, distribution centers, from our IT groups, customer service, regulatory, legal, quality, master data. All of these groups had to be involved. I'm sure I've forgotten some that were key to it, but so I apologize if anyone's listening. But that's just internally. So externally, we also had to look to what was out there. We had to look to equipment and solution providers and to the standards that could be used. The industry was doing that as a whole. Industry groups played a key role in bringing together the people with all of this knowledge and technology to be able to discuss what's out there that could be leveraged or could be developed or needed to be developed in order to meet this compliance. And really, we couldn't have accomplished what we have, and that's the industry as well as my own company, without working together, without this collaboration within the industry. So I won't say in terms of our plan at the start that we had a 10-year plan mapped out right from the beginning, because much of it has been developed as needed. As the industry figured it out together, as providers implemented the functionality advancements in the products available. Really the traceability journey that Jeannie showed in a previous slide. And that's really a good characterization. It has been a journey. We've executed a number of projects to get to this point, but DSCSA itself is not a project. We like to say that internally. It's a long-term regulatory commitment. So there's a lot that goes into it and continues to go into it.
Excellent. I think that when we talk about how do we get to compliance, right? Kind of as a group, and Greg, you mentioned kind of large suppliers, small suppliers, change control obviously is a big part of that. When I think about when you put these systems in place, and I think Laurel, you brought up a great point around, what I call the 3 Ps of any project, right? And it's, I start with a pilot, that becomes production, and production becomes permanent. So if your pilot is flawed, you're kind of, you have a lot of things to change in order to make that all work. But in early DSCSA and now in FSMA 204, there is a bit of a greenfield technology here where you get to, think about new technology. You get to think about doing things differently. And Tony, I want to come to you on this, as a technology provider, and, as somebody who has watched DSCSA, and adjusted your own technology, in respect to that, and now looking at FSMA 204, can you talk a little bit about, kind of the learnings from DSCSA, and then what you think people should think about as they go into FSMA 204 from a traceability perspective?
Yeah, no, happy to do so. And again, knowing that there's a lot of value-added resellers who are listening in here, if you take this from a perspective of an opportunity for growth or expansion of your services or what you can offer, there's a lot in here, right? In addition to just getting people into compliance. Our role in the Drug and the Supply Chain Security Act is actually, literally buried in the Drug and the Supply Chain Security Act. And what I mean by that is everybody's really rushing to get into the compliance piece of this, having a 2D code, being standardized, and the standards are obviously hugely important, because if everybody's using a different type of technology, then, well, guess what? Then nobody can talk to each other. Greg's trying to talk to his dispensers, and he's also trying to talk to his suppliers, and guess what? Nobody can speak with each other, and that's the whole reason for standardization. Also going back and thinking about the timing of this, think about the technologies that we have today that we didn't have back then, right? So that's another different dynamic, when you start to think about, all right, well, how can things change? Right now, it's settled more or less on 2D codes, but there's other ways to get the information. RFID is a great example of that. There's different Bluetooth methods for being able to do that as well. But again, it's really important that we center around standardized elements there. For us, what's interesting from a growth perspective is, if you peel apart, the words of the Drug and the Supply Chain Security Act and say, okay, what defines unfit for distribution, and what products define unfit for distribution, and they actually spell it out pretty well, right? I mean, they say, hey, look, drugs that are rendered non-saleable because conditions such as return, recall, damage, including temperature excursion or expiry, can cast doubt on the drug safety, identity, strength, quality, and purity. So think about that. So the temperature excursion words are the ones that obviously we center around, and that's our business. We detect conditions. So when you talk about technologies, John, there's a lot of companies that are out there right now that are saying, okay, well, how do I take the existing technologies of detecting an excursion or a temperature change and develop a compliant product that can either integrate into a 2D code or can integrate into an RFID, those RFID tag, those sorts of elements that can get us information down to a saleable unit level that protects who really matters, which is the patient in this case. You fast forward over to FSMA and Food Safety Modernization Act, the problem's not that much different. You look at what Jeannie just displayed there, whether we're talking about shellfish or meat or produce, all of those can harm somebody if they're unfit for distribution. So the same rules, same methods, same concepts apply. All turn into growth opportunities. You can help someone just get compliant as a value-added reseller, or you can actually expand the program and help them add value for the infrastructure that they're putting in place, for processes and infrastructure they're putting in place. And that's just starting, right? So everybody's racing to get compliant right now. Next will be, how do we bolt on or add to that? Because we're creating this really traceability superhighway that we can get a lot more information out of, including condition.
Excellent. So when we talk about areas of opportunity and systems improvements and things like that, people don't always equate compliance projects with areas that you can get additional value. So Laurel, in your organization, have you seen additional benefits, or are there areas where you see unexpected things that you got out of your DSCSA journey that might apply to other traceability initiatives?
Well, I can start by saying you can plan to see unexpected things, right? I think everybody knows that. But one area I think that we really benefited probably more than we expected was really digging into what our processes were and understanding those at a granular level, understanding all of the interdependencies between all of these processes through different functions or departments within the company. With serialization and item level traceability, accuracy is so critical. So one area that we've seen is in the area of reconciliation. We know that serial number was scanned, so that's the serial number, or that's the package with that serial number on it that needs to be sent out the door, right? So the data needs to match the items in the physical shipment, and the process of reconciling that electronic data to the physical shipment before the product goes out the door is leading to improvements in our overall order accuracy. So that's one area. I'm sorry. Yeah, if I could just add another. You've mentioned our implementation of 2D barcodes in general. And so now that we've implemented them on our packaging for DSCSA compliance, we're also applying them on our unit of use. For us, that would be a vial, a syringe, or a bag product to help improve the traceability of those items themselves within the healthcare setting. So our end customers, in many cases, hospitals and clinics, have to capture lot and expiration for the product, and they often tag it with an additional label themselves. If we can do that for them by adding a 2D with that information in it to our label on the packaging line, it helps them, it helps the patients, and that helps us.
That's excellent. You're really becoming a sort of good business downstream, and saving your customers from having to do additional tagging, and also potentially saving mistakes or other issues that could happen in that process. So that's interesting. Greg, thoughts on areas where you had potential improvements? I know that there's some challenges await for getting all of this information and product from all these different suppliers, but longer term, where do you see a fully integrated system providing significant business benefit?
Yeah, I mean, two real quick ones. The easy one being, like Tony had said, this traceability highway or traceability turnpike that we're building. I mean, the amount of data that we're getting through now with everything being serialized is fantastic, right? So the value beyond compliance, as we call it. So not just being compliant, but looking at how you use this data that you now have has been great in terms of even within your own network, being able to locate, expired product or short dated product and knowing where it is. You now have a scan of every single unit and where it is. That's a key benefit. But one thing I wanted to kind of touch on with Laurel being here is both ourselves at Cencora and Fresenius Kabi and John as well, an unexpected benefit to this DSCSA traceability was the implementation of RFID, as we ran a pilot last year with a couple other folks within the healthcare industry to check if not that RFID would replace the 2D barcode in the scanning, but would it stand up and hold itself on its own if you also RFID tagged a unit, whether it's at the unit of sale or at the unit of use, or at the case, or at the aggregated to the pallet, and could we do it? We went through this year-long pilot last year, which, you know, and I always joke about this when we talk about it at conferences, is that people always say, RFID, we did that 10 years ago and it didn't work that well. You know, and we always say, well, the technology in your phone was a lot different 10 years ago than it is today, right? I just spent a couple grand on my two daughters' new phones last night, which, ugh. But you look at that and go, you know, we stood this up last year to say, hey, we're not going to replace the 2D barcode, right, or any of that, because that's there. That's what we're using. But let's say that there is something where there is a case where, like a Fresenius RFID tags already. Could we use that, right? And does it enhance our ability to move product quicker without having to physically scan every one? Could you just move them through and validate and verify via the RFID tag because they're also they're all aligned? That was a huge benefit that we saw, that we're now, you know, the pilot study was published, I believe back in October, November timeframe. So it's out there. We had a very successful pilot, but that was one that was unexpected. It was like, yeah, let's go try this RFID stuff out and see how it works. Can it read through a liquid vial? Can it read through a foil blister pack? And guess what? It now can, right? So that was a great unexpected one that what I love to preach about.
Yeah, that's a great one, you know, and it's interesting because, you know, RFID as a technology, you know, has come such a long way, you know, even in the past 2 years. And when you think about food and food packaging and all the different areas and ways that that's being done, you know, having that as an option, and, you know, it may not be in 100% of the cases, but, you know, certainly having that as an option to speed the movement of product through the supply chain will certainly be interesting to discover. And for the solution providers that are out there, you know, think about that, you know, as you start to look at different data carriers for this traceability. And, you know, anytime you implement, you know, solutions and, you know, put in major changes such as traceability, you know, for DSCSA or for FSMA, you know, flexibility is key, you know, and thinking about, you know, how to be flexible and how to be able to change and adjust as you learn new things, I think is really important. So kind of, Laurel, your thoughts on, you know, approaching things from a flexible perspective, or, you know, changes that you had to make along the way that you can think of during your DSCSA journey?
Sure. Yeah, you know, we all recognize that we have different systems and processes in place, right? They were there before the regulation. They'll be there, same or different, after the regulation. And so that right there points out the need for being flexible. Tony also mentioned earlier the need for standardization. So you have to balance the two. There does have to be some standardization so that everybody's sort of marching in the same direction with their solutions, but flexible enough so that you can apply those same or similar solutions in your own system. So as I mentioned, the collaboration that we've seen in the pharma industry, everyone has come together trying to work toward those consistent approaches and the standardization that's needed to meet the same end goal. Not to say everyone will implement the exact same thing, of course. We all have different roles, and we have to meet each other's needs in the supply chain. So my company's output as a manufacturer has to be acceptable for Greg's company's input. What we send him has to be receivable in his system. We have to use, you know, follow the same standards and give his company the information that they need to be compliant as well. So that's partly been our goal in working with the industry groups to come toward the same goal. And I'll say one key point is that not all of our customers, not all of our suppliers have the IT departments to help them navigate this. That's something that we've run into. You know, we do have that benefit, but we've also had to help some of our own customers downstream, some of the smaller customers. We've had to help educate them in what these approaches are, how to get involved, to learn more about it. Actually even pointed out some of the standards, some of the passages of the law itself to try to promote better understanding. So, you know, a lot of education, and then just the recognition that flexibility is needed in implementation.
Yeah.
Hey, John, if I may, just to add on to what Laurel was just saying, you mentioned, you know, smaller organizations or just any organization might struggle without large IT departments, et cetera. And it brings up the big question that actually AIM is helping to solve right now, which is, you know, hey, how do I know if what I'm developing fits the standards? And they've got a great program that they just launched this fall that's called Verify Reg. And basically the whole intent of that is, as a standards, AIM obviously being the leader in the standards piece here, they're able to now say, hey, you know, yes, it does comply, or no, it doesn't. And so, you know, just a great, you know, unbiased industry resource to help see that. That'll translate all that. It's focused on DSCSA right now, but that'll translate very well into FSMA as well. But, you know, my point is if I'm a value-added reseller thinking about, you know, this as an extension of my business and a way for me to build my business, you've got a partner there that will help guide you through that in a lot of ways. So
yep, absolutely. And Tony, thanks for bringing that up. You know, and you know, I want to just real quick throw over to Greg. You know, how many instances and do you see it less now? You know, kind of what I call creative interpretation of the standards, right? So yeah. You know, how's the stabilization effort going? You know, how are you working? You know, with players who, you know, may think a little differently than things are actually written. You know, so what's the experience there that you could share with the group?
Yeah. People? That's a great question. I'll go back a couple of years too. So I came from the manufacturer space. So I used to be a supplier for a Cencora, for McKesson, for Cardinal, right? I used to be on that side, and I was a DSCSA lead in the manufacturer space for 3 years. And it's kind of funny because as I was learning all the different standards and trying to say, these are the standards, okay, this is what we have to do, this is how we send the data downstream. The big three, right, Cencora being one of them, I had 3 different responses from all the big three wholesalers that they wanted it formatted a different way. I'm like, wait, I thought we had standards, right? Now this was probably 4 or 5 years ago, but it's like, wait, we have standards in the industry so that we can all play in the same sandbox. Why am I getting 3 different responses? So it's interesting you brought that up, because I think now over time, as we got closer to the end goal here of DSCSA, it's like, no, to really ensure that we're all playing in the same sandbox, we have to do it the same way. You can't tweak the standard to what you need to make it easier for your system. You have to partner with everybody and be collaborative within the industry. So that's been a lot better. But then, as you say, we all have to be, it's kind of funny, we are our own legal and compliance, and we have to interpret the law. So in case in point, the stabilization period that came out in, August 25th, when the FDA dropped the stabilization announcement saying that they were going to, I'm not going to say delay the DSCSA date. So the original date was November 27th of 2023, but they announced the stabilization period of 1 year, so until November 27th of 2024. And it specifically stated in that updated EDDS guidance that this was not meant in any way to be a delay or take your foot off the gas or stop implementing or what you're doing, but rather turn your systems on, turn your processes on, start working it so that you can stabilize and actually work out the kinks. I always say iron out the errors, all the wrinkles, get it ready to go. So it was funny because for the next 2 months, right, September and October, we're like, wait, I heard there was a delay. We're not doing anything until next year. And it was like, oh, no, that's not what it is. Can't tell you how many times I copy and pasted in the specific wording from that EDDS guidance that said this is not a delay. It's to stabilize. We need to get it ready. But even internally, I had to fight too, to be like, wait, we're not delaying anything. We need to turn on. And even, I had senior people that were like, well, I thought we had a delay. It's like, no, I need to be on like today. This was back in September, because I need to stabilize with my partners, both upstream and downstream. They're waiting for this too. So that was always interesting too. And on that front around, especially with the stabilization. Now it's going well. I think the industry is a lot of people I think came out when, you know what, yeah, we do. We took about a 2-day break, like take a break, take a breath, stabilization. Now I'll come back Monday and we'll get going. So, you know, people really came out, and I think it kind of lit some fire under some people too, to be like, you know what, now I have time, let's get this ready.
Right.
But yeah, it's getting there. We need to see more, but yeah, it's going.
We're going to wrap up our portion here of this, but, you know, and I think interoperability, you know, everyone has talked about that, you know, creating interoperability, you know, being able to share information, you know, speaking the same language, you know, being able to share information with your partners, getting involved with your partners, you know, coming to, you know, sessions like this and going to shows and talking to a wide variety of people, I think helps create that interoperability message. I'll let the panelists just talk about, you know, the getting involved part, but, you know, Tony, you know, how do you see, you know, people getting involved and learning more about the topics?
Well, listen, I mean, I think starting with AIM, that's a pretty good start, right? I mean, you want to talk about a broad group that, you know, is we've found to be more than welcome in assisting, and you know, you get to great example, I think, of the people on this panel of those who are willing to contribute and help guide the way in and out. So it's a really great community, and I think I haven't found a person or a company yet who's not willing to help in terms of advocating and growing and building the industry. So I say stay tuned. Of course, with AIM for sure. You know, as mentioned on this slide, of course, you know, there is a there's a workshop for just about everything, right? And in fact, you know, pick your poison, and I'm sure that AIM or an affiliate of AIM has something going on it. So I'd certainly encourage each of those. And then, you know, there's a lot of there are some you know, I just think about this whole process in terms of you know, there's the normal diffusion of innovation curve, right? In terms of separating the types of people. You know, there's the early adopters, there's the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, late majority, and laggards, right? And if I think about the audience that's listening here from a value-added reseller standpoint, I'd encourage you, you know, get on the front half of that, right? Which is in the innovators, early adopters, and you know, so that you can participate in the early majority, right? If you're on the other side of that, honestly, you know, this industry is going to move past you very, very fast, because Drug and the Supply Chain Security Act is the first step. Why? Regulated and people can die, right? Then it's no coincidence that moves to FSMA, right? Food safety. Why? Well, because people can get sick and die. But then we start looking at the capabilities that are built with these highways of traceability. And now you start going into any other industry with standard operating procedures, aerospace, automotive, et cetera. It's coming to an industry near you soon, and it'll happen even faster, right? All the lumps that Greg and Laurel have felt over the past decade, you know, is just going to turn into acceleration for the next industry that's going to be able to put it into place even faster, right? So that's how I'd share, John, how and why I'm getting involved.
Yeah, so Tony, thank you for that. And, you know, and I think that brings up a great point. You know, DSCSA 10 years, FSMA 2 years, what's next, right? So being able to adopt quickly is key. And I think now, to switch gears, we're going to head off to the next panel, which is FSMA 204 in the real world. So my friend Julie McGill is going to run our panel here. I serve on the AIM Global Working Group for Food with Julie. She is Vice President of Supply Chain and Strategy with Insights Trustwell. And Julie, over to you for the rest of your introduction.
All right. Thanks so much, John. And thank you to the panel. It's just, it's so interesting to hear some of the similarities, but also some of the differences between DSCSA and FSMA 204. So yeah, so I'm excited to bring on our panelists for FSMA 204. So with that real quick, I'll do a quick introduction and then I'll have the panelists introduce themselves and then we'll jump into our Q&A as well. So so I'm Julie McGill. I'm the VP of Strategy, Supply Chain Strategy and Insights at Trustwell, formerly Food Logic, if you were familiar with the Food Logic platform. But I'm responsible for FSMA 204. I participate in a number of industry groups. And as I was looking at the attendee list, I recognize a number of your names. You might be on the Produce Traceability Initiative, some of the GS1 initiatives, Global Dialogue for Seafood Traceability. So we'll talk about how some of those things affect adoption for FSMA 204. But prior to coming to Trustwell, I was at GS1 US. For over 16 years, I focused on things like GDSN, traceability standards development, and adoption of standards in the food service industry. So I'd like to introduce my panelists and thank them for joining us today. So I'll ask each of you if you could just share your company information and a little bit about your role and responsibilities. So Ann Kistler, I'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Ann Kistler. I work for CKE Restaurants, which is Hardee's and Carl's Jr. And excuse me, and I'm a part of the QA group, and I am pretty much all things traceable at CKE.
Great, thanks, Ann. And next, Margaret.
Yes, hello, Margaret Dominguez. I am the VP of Food Safety and Compliance for Solely Organic. We are nation's leading indoor organic agriculture company dedicated to high quality, affordable, sustainably grown, 100% USDA certified organic produce. We are a leader in fresh culinary herbs and leafy greens, and you can find our product in over 20,000 stores nationwide. Like I mentioned, I'm VP of Food Safety and Compliance, in charge of food safety, quality, organic compliance for the company. Prior to Solely, I was working for Kellogg's for a few years, and before that in meat processing.
Great. And finally, Charmaine.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Charmaine Khan. I am one of the founders and Chief Strategy Officer for OpSmart Global. We are a traceability software company. Julie and I cross paths on all the groups that she mentioned. We're on PTI, we're on GS1, we do all of these. We live and breathe traceability, I think, constantly. And I'm really excited and appreciative on being on this panel. Prior to this, I lived in the world of government compliance for Department of Justice, so a very different world, but compliance nonetheless. So I look forward to the conversation.
Great, thanks so much. So with FSMA 204, like I said, there are a lot of similarities with the requirements, things around product information, location and event data. However, as Jeannie explained, how we get there is very different in FSMA 204 from a regulatory perspective. They did not prescribe some of the things that they have in DSCSA. So as John mentioned, we've got a greenfield over here. For FSMA 204, the FDA has defined the rule, as Jeannie talked about. We know what the foods are on that food traceability list. We know that we have to capture, store, and in some instances, we have to share traceability data. But how we get there, everyone's journeys are going to vary, but we have the same things that we need to do, right? We need to be interoperable. We need to be speaking a similar language. So, Margaret, I'll start with you. So FSMA 204 was finalized in January of 2023, and compliance is required, as Jeannie noted, in January of 2026. As of, oh, you know what? I'm reading my question, and actually I want to start, sorry. That is what I want to start with. So 2026, but companies right now, they have 24 months to comply, right? We had a 3-year runway. We're done with year 1. So now that, as we prepared for this, you've been working on this for a while. What areas are you focused on right now at Solely?
Yes, thank you, Julie. Great question. So for us, I think our biggest focus right now is to really move from the manual ways of collecting data to more digitalized systems and softwares. As of right now, we kind of still collecting a lot of data manually. So we have, like I said, multiple facilities across United States, from growing to packing houses, and our teammates still putting data on paper sometimes. So we are trying and focused on transition from this way of manual collecting data to digitalized system. And about a year and a half ago, I met Charmaine. We are both volunteer members for IFPA Food Safety Group. So we start chatting, and of course, knowing that FSMA 204 is coming in play, we start talking about what OpSmart can do for us. And after doing some research, we thought he was going to be a great fit for us. So at that time, we start working with Charmaine and her team to onboard OpSmart and integrate their system with our systems. So that's where we are right now. We are going through integration and building that traceability system internally. Of course, there are some challenges that we are going through. Another thing that we are working on is a standardization of the processes. Like I said, we have multiple facilities, so we want to make sure that our pack house in South Carolina collects data the same way like our pack house in Arizona or in our Washington State facility. So, and then collaboration with our customers on, again, digitalizing the ways how we are interchanging the data with them. Is it via EDI, ASNs, or PTI labels, whatever that is? Like, we trying to standardize as much as possibly we can.
Right. And, for what you just talked about, it sounds like that journey slide that we saw earlier, right? That you're looking at all your different processes, and in your journey, I'm standardizing this, I'm digitizing this, I'm getting rid of the paper, which, I think a lot of companies would be very interested to, because as you start to go through all of the different parts of your business, like you said, you have lots of different activities and facilities and functions.
Absolutely. And as of right now, we are able, like I said, the requirement is to send that sortable spreadsheets to FDA within 24 hours. And we are able to do this, but it will take time to put this all together. With having a digitalized system, we can do this in much faster with much less work on our side. So
yes, yep, great. And Anne, I know you're on the food service operator side, and CKE has been working on a tech-enabled traceability program for several years. So could you take us back to when you got started? What areas did you first focus on?
When we first started, we wanted traceability on all of our products. The chief officer that we had said, if it's an item, we didn't separate out by like number of cases. It was just, if it's an item, we want traceability on it. And so we started out asking for traceability on everything, and that is still our goal. This year, we decided to really focus on the items we have that are on the FSMA 204 list. And there's actually not that many. So I started with produce thinking, hey, I'll get this done in a couple of months. We can move on, to the rest of the items. And we have spent a lot of time on produce. It is, and so we're working with a lot of our suppliers, and a lot of the suppliers don't really understand the need or why they're doing it. It's almost, we have to spend a lot of time explaining to suppliers, like, this is your barcode. You have to verify that it's scannable. And with the DCs, there was a lot of, there's a lot of challenges with the DCs also, as far as like, it sounds simple. You have a barcode, you have RFID, you have whatever you're using to get the data, but then you've got to be able to make sure all your systems connect and all that data flows through to you. And so we're working with our suppliers. The barcodes have to scan. I mean, you're not going to have any trace data if the barcodes don't scan, if they're not good. And they have to make sure they're good before the products leave the supplier. And then, yes, you do have to have it on a spreadsheet. It has to be sent to you. But there's so many glitches in this. I mean, we spend a lot of time just making sure the barcodes are good. And a lot of time, I mean, yeah, we spend a lot of time just making sure that the data that the suppliers or the companies are sending us actually make it through to us.
Yeah, and I think just listening to you talk, and certainly for this audience, right, we have a lot of solution providers, some of whom do AIDC, which are, you know, whether it's a barcode printer, labeling systems, scanners, etc. It sounds like not only are you doing education on what's FSMA 204 all about, because they might not realize they have to comply. But then you're helping them understand, hey, here's how this all works and why that barcode is so important, because it's enabling that traceability that we're trying to, you know, this enhanced traceability record keeping.
And like some of the suppliers, they get the printer in, they get or whatever they're using, it's all set up, it's good to go. They breathe a sigh of relief. It's like, wait a minute, guys, whoa. You have to have PM on this. You've got to have the manufacturer come out. You need some periodic. I mean, it's good now, but like in 3 weeks from now, is your product still going to scan? There's a lot of maintenance and there's a lot of work maintaining good traceability.
Yeah, well, and quite frankly, if I spent all that money on printers, ink, training my teams, etc., it better work, right? Like I've made this investment, and so I think there's certainly there's solutions that are out there, but also just like you were talking about taking a look at the data, that helping them understand best practices for, you know, making sure your printer heads are clean, and, you know, some of those different issues that just they just happen to everyone, right? It's common. So yeah, perfect. All right, and Charmaine, you know, certainly as a solution provider, and we talked about the industry groups, you know, what things have you discovered working with these different groups like AIM, and we mentioned GS1 and some of these other PTI, you know, what have you learned with them or discovered? And then also, you know, as you've been then taking that information and supporting companies as they get ready for FSMA 204.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. So I think the things that Margaret Ann said are just brilliant and speak directly to the challenges that industry is facing, because they are on the ground doing the work. And there's some things that other members of the panel previously said. It's a traceability highway. It's a long-term process. And I think the word process is something we need to kind of think about, even when you think about the printer challenge that Anne mentioned. It's a process change within an organization. Processes take time. So one of the biggest challenge I find is that companies feel that, oh, FSMA's coming, we've got to start all over. This is going to cost us so much money. This is so complicated, scared, and kind of not knowing. And as a provider, as somebody who participates in, you know, in many of these panels and discussion groups, FSMA is not hard. FSMA is not difficult. The government is not asking you to redesign your processes in your institutions and your organizations. They're just saying, instead of having a pen to paper, make it a pixel on a screen so that you are able to share information. So sharing information with the FDA or sharing information with within your organization is only part of the solution. The entire solution is what Anne mentioned and what Margaret said, is that it's a matter of communicating upstream and downstream, because if you talk to Frank Giannis anytime, he always said there's a matter of collaboration. We all need to work together to collaborate, to harmonize the data, to be able to share the data and have food safety that is end to end. So because that is the essential goal of all of this, is food safety, make sure people don't get sick, the cantaloupe crisis that's going on right now, all of those type of things. And so my biggest find with the groups and with customers is that this is an upstream, downstream collaboration event. And if we all work together, if we all kind of follow those standardized things that are being asked of us, this can be done, and it's not as hard as it sounds.
Yes, it's a team effort.
Yeah, 100%.
Yep. So speaking of that team effort, I don't know if folks realize this, but now that it's January of 2024, we are 2 years away from the final rule. So when this started, we had 36 months and beyond that, but January 2026 is that date that we're working towards. And again, it is a journey. When we talk about complying with the regulation, as you just said, Charmaine, there's a lot of things that industry had already put in place. The Produce Traceability Initiative, for example, identifying products and locations, marking your packages, enabling traceability. Now, folks might not be scammed, but the foundation is laid. And so as we look at compliance, sometimes it's not as straightforward as it seems. And even though you've got an existing traceability program, there's still some things that you need to take into account, like identifying those items on the FTL, for example. So do you want to talk about a couple things that you're looking at as you're getting ready for the regulation?
Well, we identified the numbers of the items we have that are on the FTL, and some of the highest risk items are the ones that are the hardest to trace. I mean, you have a guy out there, so he's trying to get lettuce. There's the bugs, there's the weather, there's the workers. I mean, he has all this stuff he has to contend with. And then you come back to him and say, hey, your product doesn't trace. And he's like, what? I mean, it takes so much effort on some of these practices and some of these products that we just assume are going to be there. And if they're trying to label cases out in the field, I mean, there's a lot of effort that goes into some of this traceability. And what I find is almost with some of our suppliers, it's almost like we have to have calls with them and explain, like, here's what's wrong with your barcode. Here's what you need to do. I mean, it's almost like we're their, their project manager in some cases, because some of them will say, like, we don't know what to do. Yes, we want traceability. Yes, you have to have it. How can I do it? I mean, sometimes they just honestly don't know what to do.
Yeah. And that's where I think there's certainly, as part of FSMA 204, because you were an early adopter, so you were putting a program in place that people were familiar with, but maybe didn't understand all the terminology like key data elements and critical tracking events and things like that. Now that that language is set, you're not the only ones who are asking for this. Other partners will be asking them for this. Other partners, there's the webinars from the FDA, there's content from AIM and all these different parties. And as they're hearing it over and over again, the good thing is that the industry has agreed, here are the things that here's the things that we were already doing, and here's the tools that we can use, like those PTI labels, right? They have lot level information, but you got to make sure the labels work, right? So it's we still have some work to do, but it sounds like, when you're working with them, they're saying, we want to do this. Help me understand what I need to do.
If they're getting a lot better because they know it's coming. Yeah. If you tell the produce industry you want a GS1120 barcode, they look at you like, no. If you say, look, I just need you to put a PTI barcode on there, they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, if you're talking their language.
And it has to be the current one. Get your old PTI barcode off there. And so you just have to educate these guys. They'll do it, but you have to spend time making sure you're all on the same page.
Yeah. And I think that ties in great to Margaret. As we were preparing for this, you talked about educating on things like PTI labels with some of your partners. So when it comes to compliance, is what Ann's talking about, are those some of the same pain points that you're running into?
Absolutely. Again, that standardization and working with so many different customers, and some of them are giant customers and some of them are much smaller and have different requirements, definitely is something that we need to focus on, and it's a challenge. Another thing is, the complying with the rule, it's not always very straightforward and very easy. Like specifically when I'm looking at our company, our supply chain is not very simple. Yes, we are grower, we are packer, and we ship our product to customers, but we also have our suppliers that we do business with. We have partner farms in Mexico and Colombia that we procure product from. So we also have to think about them and how they will be able to comply with FSMA 204 and how they will be able to send all the information that's required to us electronically. Again, do they have resources to implement those systems and softwares? Some of them, yes, some of them probably not. Many of them are not educated on the regulation yet. So again, that's a challenge that we have to close. Same like Ann, you know, they have their customers that they have, suppliers that they have to work with and explain the challenges. Same thing we have to do with ours. I think another big pain point was internally working with Charmaine and implementing OpSmart is the data hygiene, to make sure that data is clean and it's correct data. Because if we collect data that has mistakes, that have issues, then again, that sortable spreadsheet at the end will not work and will give you not correct data that you will send to FDA. So again, working internally on making sure that our teammates are trained and they know exactly what they have to record, if it's on the laptop or other device that they have to use. It's a challenge. Many of our workers is also not English speakers. So again, another challenge here, how you train someone to collect that data in English using technology, right? So something again that we definitely are focusing on right now.
Yes, yes. And that technology piece is so important. Like the FDA has there are documents for FSMA 204 that are in Spanish and other languages. However, making sure that the tools that they're using also, can translate. That's a
absolutely
big piece of this. Yep. Absolutely. I think that flexibility piece, and the other panel talked so much about this. We recognize that we're all headed towards the same goal, right? That we collect this enhanced traceability data, but how we get there is going to vary. And so being flexible, as you both just mentioned, the smallest of the small and the largest of the large, right? We've kind of got everybody in between there. And, as we look at some of these initiatives, like I mentioned, PTI and GDST, and how these initiatives have been using different standards like those GS1 128 barcodes to capture lot level data. How can, and Charmaine, this one's for you, how can solution providers really build on these initiatives for FSMA 204?
Yeah, thank you, Julie. So I think it's good to realize that these standards, GDST, MSC also that has a standard, aquaculture also has their own standard. And these are standards that are what I think of as starting points. And I think FDA has also been very kind that they have set standards that are not asking for a lot of information, but they've kind of said, we want, your harvesting, your transformation, your shipping, they have certain things. However, when you look at, like when Margaret and I go through her supply chain, it's 100 times more complex than what the FDA is required. So I think it's good for organizations to think of all these standard companies, which are amazing and very helpful, as a starting point. You take that starting point, you do the requirements, but then you must go beyond and you must personalize it to meet your needs, because what Anne is doing with her produce is very different than what Margaret is doing with produce, but they're still both talking lettuce. So they're required, so they can take FSMA. One will be looking at the shipping and the receiving. One will be looking at the harvesting and the packing when you look at FSMA. And it's a different requirement, different traceability lot code requirement. And the requirements change based on your practice. So I think these are great starting points. And and again, we'll say that this is a journey. Start looking at those points. Talk to people like AIM, talk to people like Julie and myself, talk to GS1, and the next people, the people who are on this panel, people are going to talk about things. Talk to them, and it's not, none of us feel like, oh, you talk to us, you have to buy something. We feel that You talk to us, gain the knowledge, make your decisions within your organization, and then move forward, but don't start, I think somebody also said big bang effect. Don't start next January. You will be in a big deal of hot water, because I think just because of what Margaret and has been saying, and I'll second that, it's been a slow process. It's been like, we will send them things and it'll be what Margaret and I've spoken about, and it's perfect and we think we have it. And then we start implementing it and all the little things come out like, oh, wait, what about this? What about this? Or why doesn't this make sense? Because then you realize, okay, there's human beings involved in this, and we do things out of habit. And then there's the language barrier. So I think there's a lot of documentation in Spanish, but then you need to have the software, and that when somebody's keying in data, it should be in the language of the user and not in another language, because that leads to errors and food safety challenges. And so as OpSmart, we've now created a whole Spanish version of OpSmart for Soli, so that you reduce the chance of error and make it simpler and easier to use. So I think it's a journey, and people need to, use these resources like these type of, conferences and webinars to gain knowledge and use it as a springboard to move forward.
Yeah. And I think too, is building on what you just said, I heard Margaret talk about things like EDI and, other ways that she's sharing data today with partners. You just talked about, maybe it's manual entry. I'm keying something into a UI or a form, an electronic form, and things like that. And so that's a big piece of it too. And I'm going to just touch on this real quick, but that flexibility of meeting folks where they are. And that's what you just described, right?
Absolutely.
If I need a spreadsheet upload, if I need EDI, API, whatever the data format, those at the end of the day, you're sending the same attributes, right? I need this information for a shipping event, this information for transformation, etc. So yeah, so I think that whole piece of the journey is also, it's not that they can't do it, but if you give them a tool that's 3 years away from implementation, you could be getting data today if you had other flexible options for data collection. So I want to just talk real quick about connectivity, interoperability, because this is so very important. And so Margaret, real quick, FSMA 204 requires record keeping. You have to capture data and you have to share data. So just what we were talking about, which kind of ties into that flexibility, could you speak to some of the different ways that you share data today?
Yeah, absolutely. So like we already mentioned a couple of times in the conversation, I mean, we just went through the whole EDI project with some of our customers. The advanced shipping notices, that's a big one as well, of course, and PPI. I know a lot of customers do not require PTI yet, but that's definitely the way that we will go and move forward with. So I would say those are the main areas where we're focusing on as of right now.
Yeah, fantastic. We mentioned Frank Yanis a couple times in this presentation, and Charmaine is sitting next to him in this picture. So could you talk real quick just about getting involved a little bit for the group and industry involvement here?
Yeah, it's essential. I think it's just you gain. So this is Dubai International Food Safety Conference. I was just there a few weeks ago in Dubai. Frank was there. Nano Suarez was there. And you getting involved is one thing. You go out there and you get to have amazing food with amazing people, but you gain knowledge. You get to meet people. Nano he's an educator. I met auditors, and you get to understand the field of traceability and food safety from all different aspects. And these organizations are working hard to do amazing work. And I think it's essential to your own growth, your organization's growth, and to be able to do your job better. So like Margaret said, we met at IAFP Food Safety Council. We're both there because we're both involved in food safety, and Frank and I met because of FDA Traceability Challenge. And so AIM is great, IFT is great, IAFP, IAPF. Join, grow, learn, become a better professional yourself so you can serve your client and your own company better.
Fantastic. All right. So with that, I will hand it off now to Lucy, who is going to take both panels. If everybody wants to turn their cameras on and take yourselves off mute. All right.
Thank you,
And
Julie.
Lucy, there you are. I can hear you.
Hi, everyone. Well, that was excellent. Very, very good insight that everyone has shared. And for this part of our workshop, which is Let's Talk, Going Beyond Compliance, all our panelists, as you can see, are going to be part of it. So I don't have to introduce anyone new except myself. And, you know, my name is Lucy Angarita, and I am currently Director of Community Engagement for GS1 US. And what I do is I work with food companies across the retail, grocery, food service sectors. And even this year, I'll be expanding that into healthcare and, AGM to increase data quality, to improve operational efficiencies, and gain full supply chain visibility. Now, one of my main responsibilities over the past 3 years, which has gone by so fast, is actually lead a work group at GS1 that talks about, how to get that alignment. Everything we've been hearing, getting all supply chain stakeholders to focus on how do we become interoperable. And then prior to this, I worked for 9 years leading incident management efforts. So for those of you that know, Friday afternoons, right? Dealing with Excel sheets. I mean, it's always fun. So besides that, we actually implemented a traceability program for the subway system. So I've been very hands-on with traceability efforts, and it's very near and dear to my heart. So with that being said, just a reminder, everybody can actually type in your questions in the chat. We have that Q&A at the bottom. So as questions come in, we will be calling them out. So to start, let me just go to the first question. Now, we spoke a lot about not being able to achieve traceability in a silo, right? That importance of being able to collaborate with your network, establish those common CTEs and KDEs frameworks. So for our panelists, any key advice that the food industry can actually take from healthcare on the best way to get small, medium, large supply chain stakeholders aligned in speaking this same language in order to be interoperable, regardless of the systems or, of course, the technology that they have today. Does anybody want to take that on?
Yeah, Lucy, let me start. You had kind of two themes in there, and I want to expand on both of them. You mentioned the word silo, and that's something that I think about a lot, right? Yeah. So I think about, two types of silos, right? We have internal silos within organizations, right? So we have organizations, that don't fully understand kind of cross-functional between manufacturing and distribution and quality and on and on and on. And I think, to get traceability, you need to think about breaking down those silos first, right? So that you can understand how processes work in your own organization. And then the external silos of who talks to customers and who talks to suppliers and, how product flows through that. And again, breaking down those silos so you can, kind of understand how things flow and grab best practices from different size organizations. And then we talked, about the second part of that, which is speaking the same language. And that is super important. Greg talked about, some of the early interpretations of standards and things like that, and getting different answers from different people and different partners. So getting involved, working with, GS1, working with AIM on making sure that you're speaking the same language, and then turning that language internal back into your customer. So inside the organization, people know what a KDE is. People know what the food traceability list looks like, because as we learn more, we tend to talk less, and we tend to talk in riddles and acronyms and things like that. And people are afraid to ask what that means, what is it? What is the KDE? What is the C? What are all these things? They're just going to sit back and not understand that, and then you get misinterpretation. So that's kind of those are my thoughts on that question.
Yeah, John, I would just add to that. You're absolutely right when you talk about languages and interoperability and silos. I think we tend to stay in our silo because we're like, okay, well, I call these things crops and they might call it harvest. And I don't know how we're going to communicate because when their table or their Excel sheet comes, it doesn't make any sense to my people. I think when we do use FSMA as a standard, and that's why FDA has the KDEs and the CTEs, that they're very clearly defined. And we take those definitions of the critical tracking events and we cross-reference them with the key data elements for each critical tracking events. And you do the same ones that I do, and so does Julie, and so does Ann. Then when we send our Excel sheets to each other, or our sortable spreadsheets that the FDA wants, then we can all communicate and we all call an apple and not an apple a peach, So I think the language is very important.
Thank you, Charmaine. Yes, that's definitely critical, and it's what the FDA has been aiming for, right? Establishing that framework so we can all talk the same attributes, the same events. And talking about that a little bit, how we're capturing, how we're storing, how we're sharing that information, or how we plan to do it, what technologies, and that includes hardware, software, tags, labels, anything, do you believe are the most prominent right now being used in health versus the food industries to achieve this FDA traceability compliance? And to top it off, how aware do you think the industry is on how to use the standards to help with that?
All right, so I'll start. Certainly we heard the DSCSA panel talk about their evolution, which I thought was very interesting, right? Serialization, starting with 2D, doing pilots in RFID. And on the food side, I can speak to that. And then I'll look to my friends over on the DSCSA side to fill in this technology question. But, on the food side, just like the changing technology that they talked about on the other panel, PTI started with the GS1 128 label over 10 years ago. And that is widely used. We see it in other categories like seafood. There are categories that have been using these codes for a while, whether it was to gather catch weight information, to get that batch lot level traceability and things like that. But we're also seeing exploration into 2D, RFID, ambient IoT, and other data carriers to capture the data. What I think the common thread is, and we've seen this in some of the proof of concepts and some of the pilots, is to use standards when you use those other data carriers. So for example, with food, with RFID, we talked about how can we include the GTIN and lot information if I don't have a tag, that an RFID tag that has the capacity for all that additional information. And so the industry came together and worked on that. Another good example is we did pilots on interoperability for traceability with GS1, US, and IFT. We came together and said, hey, let's make sure that, the folks that were part of these pilots, like IBM Food Trust, SAP, Food Logic, Whole Chain, we came together and said, hey, can we share traceability data using EPCIS? And we did that. And then we took the pilot to the next level was, hey, let's get some partners involved. So Walmart and Beaver Street and Norpac and Bumblebee and other seafood companies came together, and then we did the full exchange of, supplier data, different platforms. Some were cloud-based, some were blockchain, but we had the same data set as Charmaine talked about, the key data elements and those critical tracking events. We knew what we'd be exchanging, the actual sharing, it's gonna vary by what partners choose to use. And so I think that those pilots have been so very important. And as we come into 2024 and people are testing what they're using, that's going to become critical, right? So that we can show the industry that this can be done. And so I'd love to hear from the DSCSA folks, if you had to do some of that, show me that this works as part of your work and your implementations.
Yeah, no, Julie, that's great, because I kind of had the same story for healthcare, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but you think back in the DSCSA, and it kind of started the same way, where there was a limited data set of, the NDC and maybe a lot number and an expiration date, if you had that, right? So you had that, and it was all exchanged in emails or Word documents or PDF, right? And now you're going back 15 years, right? And then you go, okay, when the DSCSA was implemented, it was the first milestone of the DSCSA was to have an electronic way of exchanging data. And that's where it was like the birth of EDI. So the electronic data exchange of these, the EDI 856, which is your ASN, and your 850s, which is your PO and your invoices. But they were all done via these EDI transactions, which was great because it was a standard, right? You had a standard where you could use that. And you even looked at that and you went, okay, same thing when I heard you say like the 128 1D linear barcode, right? You had that too, which is still prevalent. It's on every carton, bottle. It's the NDC. So it identifies what drug it is, right? But then that expanded into serialization. So EDI was like 2014, 2015. The serialization piece is where we put that 2D data matrix, the 2D barcode with the 4 product identifiers, which included that serial number, that unique serial number. That was 2018, 2017, 18. And that's when you started saying, okay, well, now we're starting pieces together and we're expanding each of the pieces that we've had over the last 15, 20 years to say now it's better. There's a little bit more. The 2D barcode holds more data. You can get more out of it. It's not just a 1D linear, which only has the NDC. We now have 4 different data identifiers, which could be even bigger. And that's where the same thing. Then we looked at there were saleable returns, which was 2019, 2020. And you said blockchain. That's why you're churning in my head, because it was like we did the same thing, where it's like we had to verify every return that comes back as a wholesaler from a dispenser to say, this bottle has exchanged hands so many times, but we're getting it back as a return. But it technically is a good product if we can verify that it's authentic and it hasn't been counterfeited in any way. So how do we verify that data? The manufacturers have that data. So what do we do with it? And that became this verification router service, the VRS we called it, which was a blockchain where the manufacturer stored on nodes. Each manufacturer had a node on a blockchain that we as a wholesaler could scan a product and it knew which node to go look at and verify it and then go do this thing. And then that's where we got to where we are now. It's like, what do we do? Do we expand on this blockchain? Do we go EPCIS, where we exchange now business to business via an EPCIS file? So we went to that too. So it sounds like we've shared a lot of the same journey in terms of data exchange with this.
Yes.
I'll jump in there a little bit too, just kind of, just to talk about the technology piece. There's I think Greg did a good job of kind of laying out the different stages that everything's in. Maybe to think a little bit more about what's happening often in the future and what innovations are enabling better, ability to read. Greg mentioned, hey, how do I read everything that's coming into my dock door? Well, one of the great solutions to that, you mentioned the RFID pilots as an example, but there's limitations to that technology, or were limitations to that technology. It's amazing to see the technologies that are coming into play now, or the tweaks, I'd say, or extensions onto those, where EM Micro has a single chip now that reads UHF all the way down to NFC. So go beyond even the dispenser in this case, or beyond the grocery store and FSMA, and now you're able to get feedback directly from the end user with a tool like that. You can even do that with QR and 2D codes, right?
Right.
So there's just now you're creating, like we talked about, this data highway Well, now what you do beyond that, right? So securing it, authenticating it, blockchain, right? There's technology evolution, right? What you do with all that data and how that data starts to get used to make better, more secure supply chains, rerouting, et cetera. Now we're talking about, the big gray area of AI, but that's actually, honestly, in the world of AI, that's like a JV problem to solve. Once the data is there, it's very, very simple, and the applications start to just exponentially explode from a value perspective. So that's what, you can probably hear in my voice, what gets us pretty excited is once we get the highway built, once we get the inputs moving, then wow, this is going to be a very, very big deal for everyone.
Thank you, Tony.
Just take it.
We have
just really
about-
quick. Yeah, just really quick, Lucy. Adding on to what Tony said, one of the genesis for this workshop today is I with Lucy and Charmaine in updating and modernizing the PTI standards, and a gentleman from Elberson's produce department was in the call, and he just said, "Well, why don't we do the same thing that pharma's doing?" It looks like they've already solved the problem, and that's when I realized that every major grocery store in the country has a pharmacy in it.
Exactly.
So these people are going to become familiar with those standards.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Yep.
Well, we did say we could talk about this like for hours, right? It definitely there's so much to discuss on the technologies and data sharing and labeling, etc. But there are a few questions coming in regarding that specific topic of technologies being used. So I'm just gonna bring in one of those really quick. Since the deadline for FSMA 204 is 2 years, but still many companies are not getting on board, what is the reason for this? Also, there was a lot of discussion regarding data. What are your views of doing traceability via blockchain, which will ensure to keep data untempered? So who would like to answer that question from the audience?
Well, just an observation on DSCSA. The comment that people aren't getting on board. Well, I think that's kind of a shared experience in both situations. And the reality is that you're going to have, like I mentioned, the diffusion curve, right? You're going to have people who are going to wait till the last minute. You're going to have people that are going to fall out as a result of it. You're going to have people who aren't going to even act until they're fined, or shut down, and that's going to be a real problem for some. So, if you're looking to expand into this, use this as a business expansion, opportunity. I would say don't target the people who aren't willing to move. Definitely want to talk to the people who are on the more cutting edge side of getting started on this.
Yeah, I mean, I can echo what Tony was just saying is that from a wholesaler perspective, when you're talking to people who aren't ready to onboard, I have found over the years that it's been mostly like a financial decision. It's just something where it's like, well, what's the output? What do I have to put out there? Oh, you need to put X number of millions of dollars into it to make sure that you're compliant. Well, it's like, well, what do I get out of it? Well, you may not get anything out of it right away, right? The ROI is not there. It's right. It's not an enhancement. It's a compliance requirement is one of the quotes that we used to say. It's not here to make your lives easier right now. It's going to actually probably make it harder at the outset, but and I think a lot of people, the ones that didn't comply or weren't not even being early adopters, just were more like those laggers. And it's like they just didn't want to put the money into it. And I've been there, right, where you're asking for multi-million dollars for hardware, software, process changes, people. And they say, why don't we wait till next year? Why don't we wait till next year? Why don't we wait till next year? Well, then next year becomes we only have 9 months left, right? And then you run out of time. And that's one of the things that we didn't get to touch on in my panel, but one of the opportunities here when you're listening to these is to, you don't have to be the first adopter, but be early. You need to get started as soon as you can. And if you haven't started already, wherever you are, you're probably already behind.
Yeah.
You got to get up there first.
I'm
If I
just
could
going
add
to
to that
take a
too.
swing
Sorry.
at the blockchain for just a second. I think blockchain is a great technology and there's a place for it in the digital world. However, the purpose of blockchain is to have your data be completely secure. My we as a company feel blockchain is a tool, but it often scares people, costs a lot of money, and is not necessary because it stops a lot of the small farmers and the smaller companies from getting into technology because it's very expensive. I think if you have a provider that has systems in place that provide security, you don't need blockchain.
And
Thank
if
you,
I
Sean.
can just add maybe too on the food safety or the food industry side, why some of the companies are not getting on board. For me, I think there's two main factors, and I think they're overlapping with the pharmaceutical, which is number one is education. There's still a lot of companies that don't understand the regulation, and they probably don't even know maybe that it's out there and what is the due date to comply. And the second thing is, of course, the resources again. So you know, a lot of companies cannot afford implement softwares or systems. And yeah, so for me, those are the main two factors here.
Yeah, and I can echo that too, again, Margaret, and I agree with you, because I've been speaking more about the manufacturer side, but even on our side, like the dispenser side, so downstream from us, the same thing. Dispensers, and I'm not knocking any of them, but they're of all shapes and sizes. You have large retail pharmacy chains, and then you have independent pharmacies, which is literally like Greg's Pharmacy on the corner, and I've owned it for 50 years.
Right.
I talk to those dispensers too. We try to onboard them, and the same thing. I usually ask a non-scientific poll at the start of our calls on a scale of 1 to 5, how well or how knowledgeable they are in DSCSA, with a 5 being I'm an expert, I don't know why I'm on the call, with a 1 being I can't spell DSCSA. The average answer I get is about a 2, right? That they heard about it, but they don't know what it is. But yet if they don't do it, it could literally put them out of business. So it's kind of interesting to be in that conundrum where it's like, well, guys, this is where we need to be, right? You need to, this is what now we'll help educate you too, which we do a very big piece of that, but it's, you know, the education piece is there, or the lack of education, let's say, or understanding about what these compliance laws are is another factor. Yeah, you're right.
Well, thank you everyone for the insight there. Next question. So we've heard a lot about how people say traceability is a must for regulatory compliance, but there's no ROI in traceability. And today we've talked about so many areas of opportunities that actually does bring the tangible ROI. And even, you know, I can relate to my previous life where we did a Lean Six Sigma study just on, you know, setting the foundation of GS1 standards in order to achieve that traceability. And it's public. You can actually Google it. It talks about how reduced labor was quantified, even cleaning up product information so you know what you're tracing, right? That is actually quantifiable ROI with truckload optimization, product retrieval costs being minimized because you don't have to cast a very wide net to get the product that's affected, you know, labor savings, inventory management being optimized, and so much more that we talked about today. So for our panelists, do you see companies are beginning to establish these metrics and in order to, from the beginning, measure these opportunities, measure the tangible ROI that can be gained through not just the traceability and the recall piece, but so many other areas that open up with supply chain visibility? John, do you want to talk to us a little bit about this?
Yeah, I think, you know, I want to start the conversation, and I know we're short on time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but, you know, a long time ago, I had a developer tell me there's 2 kinds of systems. There's those that can work and those that will work, right? And the reason I bring that up is, you know, you may not get an immediate ROI from your traceability compliance solution, but you need to embed it in systems that will work within your supply chain and within your organization, so that as you gather more information, as you go through the change control, you will get an ROI, because ultimately you need to drive this toward an embedded process in your supply chain that you can leverage all kinds of other benefits from. And if you don't do it that way, if you put in a can work system that somebody has to think about and they work on it in a silo and they do it just because they have to, you're never going to get an ROI. So that's what I think about there. You know, and, you know, from a metrics perspective, you know, I know, you know, Jeannie, I know, has some thoughts on that one, and you know, I'm gonna turn the floor to her for that.
Well, thank you, John, and I'll be brief as well. But, you know, as you talked about this, and we've talked about this, a lot of people look at a compliance program, and it certainly is the minimum that you have to do to participate in that industry. And so, as we already explained, we're not the FDA. We encourage you to reach out if you have questions about the regulations specifically. But obviously, you want to do the minimum to participate in industry. But looking back at the apparel industry, the apparel started adopting RFID, or let's just call it good data collection, back in 2008. And originally, they started it for much the same reason, because of compliance. You know, someone mandated it and they had to do it. But what they found, as John pointed out, embedded it into their systems, they found inventory accuracy. They were able to reduce waste, reduce excess inventory, reduce expired inventory, and all these things add to your bottom line. So education, community, talk to people, learn more about it, and reach out to the GS1, to AIM, to the GDST, depending on what field you're in, to HEMS, HDI, whatever there is, there's people out there talking about these initiatives and getting people involved.
Yeah, and I'll just build on that, Jeannie, and Lucy, you'll know who I'm talking about here. It doesn't even have to be a huge, ROI. There's one distributor that Lucy and I used to work with who, he's like, okay, we got to scan these GS1 128 barcodes. Well, they started using the data in their warehouse management system. And so they used the freshness, the pack date information to, instead of do FIFO, first in, first out, they were doing first expired, first out. And they were finding that they were getting better turns, and their customers were happy because they were getting fresher product. And so, just this one little thing that, somebody in the warehouse said, hey, I could use that data, changed their customer perception, which then in turn certainly could gain them new business, more business. You could become a preferred vendor. But it was a simple idea that led to a big change in how they manage their inventory.
Yes, and we did measure that for several years and realized as distributors started scanning inbound, putting that in their warehouse management systems, it was very telling how the data, reducing the mispicks, the product freshness being improved, all of that was absolutely something that happened. And it was very, very effective. So yeah, and they actually share that, Julie, in several presentations.
Yeah.
All right, so we have 2 more minutes. I don't know, Mike, do you want to close with some remarks?
Yeah, no, thank you, Lucy, for handling the Q&A session. Greatly appreciated. And I'd like to thank the rest of our panelists here for this workshop today for all their insights. Again, greatly appreciated and great information that you provided. Thanks to the audience for joining us here today and for their active participation. If you have additional questions, the contact information for our panelists is on the screen right now. I will also be sharing AIM North America's information as well, so you can always contact us to get more information about AIM initiatives and if any questions that you have about FSMA or the DSCSA. Recording will be available here in the coming days, and if you did register for the webinar, you will be notified when that recording is available. Again, thank you everyone for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.